Dr. Bell crouched behind a stack of supply crates in Cargo Bay 7, listening for footsteps. The security patrol had passed by twice already, and she needed to reach her quarters without being seen. Inside her jacket, a small orange bundle shifted slightly, letting out the faintest purr. "Shh, Whiskers," she whispered. "Just a little further." The cat had somehow slipped past 3 different checkpoints during the loading process at Earth Station. Bell found her curled up in a box of scientific equipment, looking completely at home among the research tools. Any reasonable person would have reported the stowaway immediately. But after 6 months of preparation for humanity's first diplomatic mission to the Galactic Federation, Bell felt anything but reasonable. The journey to Nexara would take 6 months through deep space. 200 humans crammed into a ship designed for efficiency, not comfort. The alien crew members from the Federation had made it clear that they viewed this mission as a formality. Humans were the newcomers, the untested species that needed to prove their worth. Bell figured a little morale boost couldn't hurt. She made it to her quarters without incident and set up a small area for Whiskers behind her desk. The cat immediately began exploring, sniffing at equipment and rubbing against chair legs. Bell smiled for the first time in weeks. 3 decks up, Reed reviewed the mission parameters one more time. Earth's first diplomatic vessel, Harmony, carried representatives from every major nation and scientific discipline. The pressure was immense. One mistake could set back human-alien relations by decades. The Federation had been polite but distant during first contact. They spoke in terms of protocols and procedures, efficiency ratings, and resource allocations. Everything had to be measured, calculated, optimized. Reed understood the logic, but it felt cold. Inhuman, ironically. His door chimed. "Enter, Doctor." Bell stepped inside, looking nervous. "We need to talk." Reed gestured to a chair. Bell had impressed him during the mission briefings. Sharp mind, practical approach to problems. If she was worried about something, he wanted to hear it. "I made a mistake," she began. "During loading, I found something that shouldn't be here. Someone that shouldn't be here." Reed raised an eyebrow. "A person?" "Not exactly." Bell took a breath. "A cat. A small orange tabby. She must have gotten into the cargo during final preparations." Reed leaned back in his chair. In his 20 years of military service, he had dealt with smugglers, spies, and saboteurs. Never a cat. "Where is it now?" "My quarters. She's very quiet, well-behaved. I've already worked out feeding schedules and waste management. She won't be any trouble." "Doctor, you know the regulations. No unauthorized biological specimens. The alien crew members will see this as a violation of security protocols." Bell nodded. "I know. But Reed, have you seen the crew lately? Really looked at them? We're all walking around like robots, trying to be perfect little diplomats. The stress levels are through the roof. Morale is at rock bottom." Reed had noticed. The usually cheerful communications officer hadn't smiled in a week. The engineers were snapping at each other over minor issues. Even the medical staff seemed on edge. "A cat isn't going to solve our problems," Reed said. "Maybe not, but it might. Help people remember why they're human." Reed considered this. The Federation crew members operated with machine-like precision. Every action calculated for maximum efficiency. The Zenthari delegation leader, Nex, had actually complimented humans on their improving logical consistency during the voyage. It hadn't felt like a compliment. "Show me," Reed said finally. They made their way to Bell's quarters through corridors filled with the soft hum of ship systems. The Harmony was a marvel of engineering, a joint human Federation construction that represented the best of both technologies. It was also sterile, functional, and completely lacking in personality. Bell opened her door and Whiskers immediately appeared, stretching and yawning. She looked up at Reed with bright green eyes, then walked over and began rubbing against his legs. Despite himself, Reed felt his shoulders relax. The simple act of petting the cat brought back memories of his childhood home, weekend mornings, and a world where not everything needed to be optimized for efficiency. "She's been through quarantine?" he asked. "Full medical screening before departure? She's healthier than half the crew." Reed scratched behind Whisker's ears and made his decision. "She stays in your quarters. No exceptions. If the alien crew finds out, this conversation never happened." Bell grinned. "Thank you." Word spread quietly through the human crew over the next few days. People began finding excuses to visit the science deck. Technician Ross claimed he needed to recalibrate sensors. Communications Officer Park suddenly required additional xenobiology consultations. Even the normally serious Security Chief Davis made an appearance to discuss biological containment protocols. Each visitor left Bell's quarters with a slightly lighter expression. Whiskers seemed to understand her role as morale officer, distributing attention equally among all visitors. She had a particular talent for appearing whenever someone looked stressed, as if she could sense emotional distress. The alien crew members noticed the change but couldn't identify the cause. Nex commented that human efficiency had decreased by 3%, but stress indicators had dropped significantly. Commander Voss of the Corvin military contingent noted that humans were exhibiting more unpredictable behavioral patterns, but couldn't determine if this was positive or negative. Neither alien delegation suspected that a small Earth predator was responsible for the change. Whiskers, meanwhile, adapted to shipboard life with the confidence of a creature that had never doubted her right to be anywhere she chose. She established a routine that included patrol rounds of the science deck, meals at precisely timed intervals, and afternoon naps in whatever location offered the most warmth and comfort. Dr. Bell documented everything, partly for scientific interest, and partly to justify her decision to read. She noted that crew members who spent time with Whiskers showed improved problem-solving abilities and increased cooperation with colleagues. The cat seemed to serve as a social catalyst, giving people a common point of connection. What Bell didn't document, because she didn't yet understand its significance, was how Whiskers' presence was beginning to change human behavior in subtle ways. People were taking longer routes through the ship to pass by her favorite spots. They were making decisions based on intuition rather than pure logic. They were becoming more flexible, more adaptive, more human. The Harmony continued its journey toward Nexara, carrying its diplomatic mission and its secret passenger through the vast emptiness between stars. Behind them, undetected by any sensors, ancient machines had begun following their trail. The Devourer swarm had found their next target, and they were very interested in studying this new species that had joined the Galactic Federation. They had no idea that their carefully calculated plans were about to encounter something their logical frameworks couldn't process. The chaos factor of a small orange cat who believed the entire universe existed for her personal entertainment. The distress signal came through at Aero 347 ship time, cutting through the usual background chatter of deep space communications. Emergency frequencies lit up the communications board like a holiday display, all carrying the same desperate message from mining colony Theta 7. "Unknown vessels attacking. Defenses failing. Request immediate assistance." Park, the night shift communications officer, stared at the readings with growing alarm. The signal was weak, distorted by distance and interference, but the terror in the colonist's voice came through clearly. She routed the message to Reed's quarters and waited for orders. Reed arrived on the bridge within minutes, still pulling on his uniform jacket. The alien crew members gathered around the tactical display, their faces showing varying degrees of concern and calculation. "Distance to colony?" Reed asked. 18 hours at maximum warp, Park replied. "But, sir, our orders are to proceed directly to Nexara. The diplomatic mission takes priority over individual colony defense." Nex, the Zenthari science officer, nodded approvingly. "Correct assessment. The strategic value of this diplomatic contact exceeds the tactical value of one mining operation. Logic dictates we continue our planned course." Commander Voss of the Corvin delegation crossed his arms. "Agreed. Military resources should not be diverted for minor engagements. The colony has its own defense systems." Reed looked at the tactical display showing their current position and the colony's location. 18 hours. By the time they arrived, it might be too late to help anyone, but that wasn't the point. The point was trying. "Change course for Theta 7, he ordered. "Maximum warp." The alien officers exchanged glances. Nex stepped forward. "This decision contradicts optimal mission parameters. Why sacrifice diplomatic objectives for uncertain tactical gains?" Reed met his gaze steadily. "Because it's the right thing to do." The Zenthari's expression showed the same confusion Reed had seen whenever humans made decisions based on ethics rather than efficiency. Nex returned to his station, muttering calculations under his breath about decreased mission success probabilities. The next 18 hours passed in tense preparation. The Harmony wasn't a warship, but it carried enough defensive systems to make a difference. Weapons crews ran drills, while engineering pushed the engines beyond recommended safety margins. Throughout the ship, humans prepared for their first real combat against an unknown enemy. Down in the science section, Whiskers sensed the change in atmosphere. The humans who visited her were more distracted, their movements sharper and more focused. She responded by being extra affectionate, seeming to understand that her friends needed comfort. Dr. Bell found herself spending more time with the cat, partly for stress relief and partly to keep her contained. The last thing they needed during a crisis was their unauthorized passenger wandering the corridors. When they dropped out of warp at the colony system, the scope of the disaster became clear. 3 massive mechanical structures hung in space around the mining facility, each one the size of a city block. They moved with purpose and precision, extending long appendages that stripped material from the colony's outer structures like a swarm of mechanical insects. "Devourer swarm," Voss breathed, his usual stoic demeanor cracking. "The ancient machines. They were supposed to be dormant." Reed studied the tactical display. The colony's defenses were putting up a fight, but their weapons seemed to have no effect on the mechanical invaders. Energy beams that should have pierced armor simply dissipated against strange field generators. Missiles exploded harmlessly against adaptive shielding. "They're not just attacking," Bell observed from her position at the science station. "They're learning. Every time the colony tries a new defensive pattern, those things adapt and counter it." Reed nodded grimly. "Recommendations? Standard Federation tactical doctrine suggests a coordinated assault on primary power nodes," Nex reported. "Historical data indicates 73% success rate against swarm units." "Execute," Reed ordered. The Harmony dove into the battle, weapons blazing. For approximately 30 seconds, their assault seemed effective. Then the swarm units simply adapted, their shields reconfigured to absorb the Harmony's weapon frequencies. Their movements shifted to account for human tactical patterns. "They're reading us," the tactical officer reported. "Every move we make, they counter within seconds." Reed gritted his teeth. This was exactly what the Federation feared about the swarm. Perfect adaptation. No matter what strategy you used, they would analyze it, learn from it, and develop countermeasures. Fighting them was like trying to defeat your own reflection. That's when the explosion hit. A swarm harvester had gotten close enough to the Harmony to fire some kind of energy pulse. The ship rocked violently, throwing everyone against their stations. Emergency lights flickered as power systems struggled to compensate. "Hull breach on Deck 7, the damage control officer reported. "Section 12 through 15. Emergency bulkhead sealed, but we've lost atmosphere in the science wing." Belle's heart sank. Her quarters were in Section 13. Whiskers was trapped behind emergency bulkheads in a section with no air. She started to rise from her station, but Reed caught her eye and shook his head slightly. Now wasn't the time. The battle continued for another 20 minutes before Reed finally ordered a withdrawal. The Harmony limped away from the colony, which was now completely overrun by swarm harvesters. They had failed, and hundreds of colonists had paid the price. "Casualty report," Reed ordered once they were clear. "No fatalities," the medical officer reported. "Several injuries from the explosion, but everyone's accounted for." "The hull breach has been sealed," engineering added. "Atmosphere restored to affected sections." Belle was already moving toward the turbo lift. Reed followed her along with a damage assessment team. When they reached her quarters, they found chaos. Equipment scattered across the floor, furniture overturned, everything covered in a fine layer of debris from the hull breach, and sitting calmly in the middle of it all, grooming herself with complete composure, was Whiskers. "How?" Reed asked. Belle was already checking her improvised cat supplies. "The environmental suits," she realized. "When the emergency bulkhead sealed, the section's emergency life support activated. It wasn't enough for humans, but for something as small as her..." She knelt down, and Whiskers immediately came over, purring and rubbing against her legs as if nothing unusual had happened. Belle noticed something strange, though. The cat's behavior seemed different, more alert. Her pupils were dilated, and her movements had an edge of excitement that hadn't been there before. "She's been hunting," Belle realized. "Look." Scattered around the room were the remains of several small maintenance drones. The tiny robots were designed to perform routine repairs in areas too small for human access. They had apparently been trying to assess damage in Belle's quarters when they encountered an unexpected predator. "She killed maintenance drones?" Reed asked. Her hunting instincts kicked in. The movement patterns, the size, to her they probably looked like mechanical mice. Belle gathered up the drone remains, noting how cleanly they had been disabled. Whiskers had gone for their optical sensors first, then their mobility systems. Efficient, precise, and completely instinctual. What they didn't realize was that this small act of feline predation had just introduced the first truly random variable into the swarm's perfect analytical systems. The drones had been transmitting data about human behavioral patterns and ship systems when they were suddenly eliminated by something the swarm had never encountered, an Earth predator operating on pure instinct. Somewhere in the depths of space, ancient machine intelligences were trying to process data that made no logical sense. The mathematical models that had perfectly predicted every Federation species for millennia were producing error messages. For the first time in their existence, the Devourer swarm had encountered something their algorithms couldn't categorize. Back on the Harmony, Belle cleaned up her quarters while Whiskers supervised from her favorite perch on the desk. The cat seemed pleased with herself, as if she had successfully defended her territory from invasion. "Good girl," Belle said softly, scratching behind her ears. "Though I don't think anyone's going to believe what you just did." Reed watched the interaction with new understanding. They had just witnessed humanity's first military engagement with the swarm, and while they had lost the battle, something significant had happened. Something that might change everything. He just didn't know it yet. Ross was having the worst day of his career when a small orange projectile came flying across the engineering deck. The maintenance bolt bounced off 3 different panels before rolling to a stop near the plasma conduit housing. Behind it, moving, with the focused determination of a hunter, came Whiskers. "Not now," Ross muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. The warp core had been making strange noises since the battle at Theta 7, and he was already 6 hours behind on diagnostics. The last thing he needed was a cat disrupting his work. Whiskers ignored his mood completely. She crouched low, wiggling her hindquarters as she prepared to pounce on the bolt. Ross watched in fascination despite his frustration. The cat's movements were perfectly calculated, every muscle tensed for the perfect strike. She leaped, landing squarely on the bolt and sending it skittering under a maintenance panel. Without hesitation, she squeezed into the narrow space after it. "Great," Ross said. "Now I have to crawl under there and get you both out." He grabbed a portable light and squeezed into the maintenance crawlway. The space was barely large enough for a person, filled with conduits and junction boxes that made movement difficult. Ross followed the sound of Whiskers' hunting activities deeper into the service area. He found her batting the bolt back and forth in a small chamber he had never seen before. The space was behind the main warp core housing, accessible only through the narrow crawlway. Ross played his light around the area and froze. A hairline crack ran along the primary plasma containment vessel. It was so small he might have missed it during routine inspections, but under the stress of combat operations, it would have grown. Eventually, it would have led to containment failure, warp core breach, complete destruction of the ship and everyone aboard. "You found it," Ross whispered to Whiskers, who was still playing with her bolt. "You actually found it." He spent the next 4 hours making emergency repairs, working in the cramped space while Whiskers supervised. The cat seemed to understand the importance of the work, staying quiet and out of the way. When Ross finally emerged, exhausting but relieved, he found her waiting for him with something that looked almost like pride. "I owe you dinner," he told her. "Maybe a whole fish." 3 decks up, Park was trying to figure out why the sensor array kept producing ghost contacts. The readings showed objects appearing and disappearing at random intervals throughout the ship. Nothing threatening, just irritating blips that made her job harder. She traced the problem to the maintenance drone network. The small robots were moving in completely unpredictable patterns, clustering in areas for no apparent reason, then suddenly scattering in different directions. It was as if they were being chased by something. Park pulled up the drone control interface and discovered that their behavioral algorithms had developed what could only be described as paranoia. After the incident in Dr. Bell's quarters, where several drones had been destroyed by an unknown predator, the entire network had begun exhibiting avoidance behaviors. They were trying to hide from Whiskers. The cat's hunting instincts had activated around anything small and moving, turning routine maintenance into a ship-wide game of cat and mouse. The drones, programmed for self-preservation, had learned to detect her presence and change their routes accordingly. The unintended consequence was that the drones were now operating in genuinely random patterns instead of their usual predictable maintenance schedules. This randomness was creating false sensor readings, making the harmony appear to flicker in and out of existence on external detection systems. Park realized this might actually be an advantage. She made a note to discuss it with Reed. If they were being tracked by swarm scouts, this electronic camouflage could be useful. Meanwhile, Dr. Bell was documenting changes in crew behavior that she found both fascinating and slightly concerning. People were spending more time on the science deck, finding excuses to visit Whiskers, but their interactions with the cat were changing them in subtle ways. Technician Davis had always been methodical and careful. Now he was taking intuitive leaps in his diagnostic work, trusting hunches instead of following procedures step by step. Communications Officer Park was experimenting with new frequency patterns based on what she called feline inspiration. Even Security Chief Martinez had begun incorporating unpredictable elements into patrol schedules. The alien crew members were confused by these changes. Nex approached Bell one day with a data pad full of behavioral analysis. Human efficiency has improved by 8%, he reported. However, predictability has decreased by 15%. This creates calculation difficulties for tactical planning. Bell nodded thoughtfully. Maybe predictability isn't always an advantage. Explain. If we can't predict our own actions, how can an enemy predict them? Nex considered this for several minutes. The concept of beneficial unpredictability was foreign to Xanthari thinking. Everything in their culture was based on logical optimization and calculated outcomes. This theory requires testing, he concluded finally. But it contradicts fundamental, strategic principles. Commander Voss was having similar difficulties understanding the changes in human behavior. His people were warriors who believed in discipline, training, and proven tactics. The increasingly chaotic human approach to problems made him uncomfortable. Your crew is becoming unreliable, he told Reed during one of their briefings. Military effectiveness requires consistent responses to standard situations. Reed looked at the mission reports scattered across his desk. Since Whiskers had been loose on the ship, human crew members had solved problems faster, adapted to new situations more readily, and shown improved morale under stress. By every practical measure, they were performing better. Maybe reliability is overrated, Reed said. Voss stared at him as if he had spoken in an alien language. Reliability is the foundation of military success. So is adaptability. And right now, we need to be able to adapt to threats we've never faced before. The conversation was interrupted by an alert from the bridge. Long-range sensors had detected something following them through hyperspace. Multiple contacts, maintaining perfect formation at the edge of detection range. Swarm scouts, Park reported when Reed reached the bridge. They've been tracking us since we left Theta 7. Reed studied the sensor display. The pursuing ships matched their speed exactly, staying just far enough back to avoid detailed scans. They were being studied, analyzed, cataloged for future reference. Can we lose them? Not using standard evasion patterns. They're matching our every move. Reed thought about his conversation with Voss, about reliability and predictability. If the swarm could counter every standard tactic, maybe it was time to try something non-standard, bridge to engineering. Ross, I need you to make our warp signature as chaotic as possible. Sir? I want random fluctuations, irregular patterns, anything that makes us harder to track. Ross was quiet for a moment. I can do that, but it'll be rough. The ride won't be smooth. Do it. For the next 6 hours, the Harmony bucked and weaved through hyperspace like a ship with a drunk pilot. The warp core fluctuations that Ross created sent the vessel careening along unpredictable paths that defied every principle of efficient space travel. The crew adapted with surprising ease. Instead of fighting the erratic movement, they learned to work with it. Operations that would have been impossible on a properly functioning ship became routine as humans found ways to use the chaos to their advantage. The alien crew members were less successful. Nex spent most of the time in his quarters, unable to cope with the motion. Voss complained that the irregular movement made military drills impossible to conduct. But it worked. After 6 hours of chaotic flight, the swarm scouts fell behind and eventually disappeared from sensors. They had lost their pursuit. How? Reed asked. Their tracking systems are designed for logical flight patterns, Bell explained. They can predict and follow any efficient course. But random movement? That's harder to analyze and anticipate. Reed nodded slowly. They had stumbled onto something important. The swarm's greatest strength was their ability to learn and adapt to logical patterns. But chaos wasn't logical. Randomness couldn't be predicted or countered because it had no underlying system to analyze. Down in her quarters, Whiskers was completely unaware that her influence on the ship's operations had just helped them escape from one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators. She was busy with more important matters, a sunny spot near the viewport that required immediate napping attention. She stretched out in the artificial sunlight, purring contentedly. Around her, humans were learning to think like cats, flexibly, instinctively, and with a healthy appreciation for the value of controlled chaos. The transformation was just beginning. The emergency klaxons were screaming when Whiskers decided to investigate the pretty dancing lights in the restricted navigation core. She had slipped away from Dr. Bell's quarters during the chaos of the battle alert, following her nose and curiosity through corridors filled with running humans. The mining colony of Kepler-7 was under attack. This time, the Harmony had arrived early enough to make a difference, but the swarm harvesters were already adapting to their tactics. Reed watched from the bridge as their weapons became less effective with each passing minute. "They're learning our patterns faster than before," the tactical officer reported. "Whatever advantages we had at Theta 7, they've been countered." Reed nodded grimly. The swarm had analyzed their previous encounter and developed specific countermeasures for human tactics. Their ships moved in perfect coordination, their shields adapted in real time to weapon frequencies, and their harvesting operations continued with mechanical efficiency despite the Harmony's attacks. "We need something new," Reed said. "Something they haven't seen before." In the conference room behind the bridge, the senior staff argued over options while Whiskers explored the navigation core 3 levels below. The chamber was normally off-limits to everyone except the senior navigation staff, but the emergency had left it unattended. Security protocols that would normally prevent a cat from entering had been overridden to allow rapid personnel movement. Whiskers found herself in a room filled with floating holographic displays. Stars and planets danced in 3-dimensional space around her, creating patterns of light that triggered every hunting instinct she possessed. She crouched low, watching a particularly bright cluster of dots that seemed to be moving independently of the others. Her first swipe at the lights was purely playful. Her paw passed harmlessly through the hologram, but the gesture registered on the navigation sensors as a command input. The display flickered and changed, showing new patterns and configurations. Intrigued, Whiskers began batting at different light clusters. Each swipe triggered new displays, new configurations, new patterns. The navigation computer, designed to respond to deliberate human commands, instead found itself processing random inputs from a creature that saw the entire universe as an elaborate toy. Chief Navigator Park found her 20 minutes later, alerted by the cascade of system alerts coming from the navigation core. She arrived expecting to find a critical malfunction. Instead, she discovered Whiskers sitting calmly in the center of the room, surrounded by the most complex 3-dimensional tactical display she had ever seen. "What did you do?" Park whispered. The cat looked up at her with green eyes that seemed to suggest the question was obvious. She had been playing with the pretty lights. What else would she do? Park studied the display more carefully. The navigation system was showing something she had never seen before. A real-time map of micro-wormhole formations throughout the local space around Kepler-7. The data was being generated by an ancient subroutine buried deep in the ship's cultural database, something that hadn't been activated in decades. She traced the program's origin and found references to Earth's maritime navigation history. Sailors reading ocean currents and weather patterns, predicting storms and finding safe passages through dangerous waters. Somehow, Whisker's random inputs had awakened this sleeping algorithm and adapted it to three-dimensional space navigation. "Bridge, this is navigation," Park called. "You need to see this." Reed arrived within minutes, followed by Bell and the rest of the senior staff. They stared at the display in amazement. "These are gravitational microtunnels," Bell explained. "Natural formations in space-time, too small for large ships but large enough for fighters or shuttles. I've never seen them mapped in real time before." Park pointed to several formations near the swarm fleet. "Look at this. These passages lead directly into their formation. Their own gravitational fields are creating blind spots in their sensor coverage." Reed studied the tactical implications. The passages were too small for the Harmony, but they had a full squadron of shuttles in the launch bay. Small, fast, and agile enough to use the microtunnels. "Can we trust this data?" he asked. "The algorithm is sound," Park replied. "It's based on pattern recognition systems that served Earth's ocean navigators for thousands of years. If anything, it might be more reliable than our modern sensors." Reed made his decision. "Launch all shuttles. Use these passages to get inside their formation." Commander Voss stepped forward. "This violates every principle of fleet tactics. Ships of the line should maintain formation and engage at optimal range." "The ships of the line aren't working," Reed replied. "Time to try something different." The shuttle launch was controlled chaos. 20 small craft launched simultaneously, each following different micro-wormhole passages toward the swarm fleet. The swarm's sensors, calibrated for large ship movements and predictable tactical patterns, failed to detect the approaching shuttles until they were already inside the formation. What followed was unlike any space battle in recorded history. The shuttles, guided by an algorithm based on reading ocean currents, moved through the swarm formation like dolphins swimming through a school of fish. They were too small and too fast for the massive harvesters to target effectively, and their movement patterns defied every tactical prediction the swarm had developed. The harvesters, designed to work in perfect coordination, found their formation, disrupted by tiny craft that appeared and disappeared without warning. Their weapons, optimized for ship-to-ship combat, couldn't track targets that moved like living creatures rather than military vessels. "How are they doing this?" Nex asked, studying the tactical display. "Their flight patterns show no logical structure." Bell watched Whiskers, who had somehow ended up on the bridge during the excitement. The cat was sitting calmly in Reed's chair, observing the battle with the same focused attention she gave to hunting mice. "They're thinking like predators," Bell realized. "Not like military strategists. They're using instinct instead of training." The shuttle pilots had indeed abandoned formal tactics in favor of intuitive movement. They swooped and darted through the swarm formation, striking vulnerable points and disappearing before the enemy could respond. Their attacks were uncoordinated, by military standards, but devastatingly effective in practice. Within an hour, the swarm harvesters began withdrawing from Kepler-7. Their perfect coordination had been shattered by an enemy that refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. The ancient machines that had conquered half the galaxy found themselves defeated by tactics that made no logical sense. Reed watched the swarm fleet retreat and felt a mixture of triumph and bewilderment. They had won, but he wasn't entirely sure how. The victory had been achieved through methods that contradicted everything he had learned about military strategy. "Status report," he called. "All shuttles returning safely," the tactical officer reported. "Minimal damage to our forces. The colony is secure." Reed looked down at Whiskers, who had begun grooming herself with the satisfaction of a job well done. The cat had somehow triggered a chain of events that led to their victory, but she seemed completely uninterested in the praise and attention focused on her. "Dr. Bell," Reed said quietly. I want a full report on what happened in the navigation core. Everything. Bell nodded. I've already started documenting the event, but Reed, I don't think we fully understand what we're dealing with here. Explain. The algorithm that mapped those micro wormholes wasn't designed for space combat. It was created for reading natural patterns, for finding paths through chaos. Whiskers didn't activate it deliberately. She was just playing. Reed considered this. You're saying the cat accidentally discovered a new form of space navigation? I'm saying the cat represents something we haven't fully recognized. She's a chaos generator. Her actions create ripple effects that cascade into larger consequences. Most of the time, those consequences are beneficial, but we don't understand why. Commander Voss approached them, his expression troubled. Your tactics today were effective, but they cannot be replicated through training. How do you teach intuitive movement? How do you drill random behavior? Reed didn't have an answer. The victory at Kepler 7 had been achieved through methods that couldn't be standardized or repeated. They had won by abandoning everything. That made military operations predictable and reliable. Maybe that's the point, Bell suggested. Maybe the ability to abandon structure when necessary is itself a strategic advantage. Next joined the conversation, his usual composed demeanor showing cracks of confusion. The Zenthari Confederation has developed military doctrine through mathematical analysis of 10,000 years of warfare. Today's battle contradicts fundamental strategic principles. And it worked, Reed pointed out. Yes, but why? That was the question that would occupy military strategists for generations. How had a small Earth predator's playful behavior led to a revolutionary form of space combat? How had chaos defeated order? How had randomness overcome perfect logic? Whiskers, oblivious to the philosophical crisis she had created, finished grooming herself and jumped down from Reed's chair. She had more important things to do. The afternoon sun streaming through the viewport had created a perfect napping spot near the science station, and she intended to claim it before anyone else noticed. Behind her, the greatest military minds of 3 species tried to understand how a cat had revolutionized galactic warfare. They would be trying to figure it out for a very long time. The answer, had they been able to ask Whiskers directly, was simple. She had been playing with the pretty lights, and the universe had responded by revealing some of its hidden patterns. That's what happened when you approach the cosmos with curiosity instead of fear, with playfulness instead of rigid expectations. But humans were only just beginning to learn that lesson. The Galactic Federation Council Chamber on Nexara had hosted many historic moments, but none quite like this. Representatives from 200 worlds watched in fascination as Captain Reed stood before them holding a small orange cat who seemed more interested in the ornate ceiling decorations than the most important diplomatic gathering in galactic history. Honored delegates, Reed began, I present the tactical officer responsible for humanity's recent victories against the Devourer swarm. The chamber erupted in confused chatter. Translator systems struggled with the concept of a non-sentient tactical officer. Several delegates demanded clarification about human military structure. Counselor Prime Zenth of the Rigel Collective raised a crystalline appendage for silence. Captain Reed, we have reviewed your mission reports. Your claims about chaos-based warfare tactics are difficult to accept. Please explain how randomness can be weaponized. Reed looked down at Whiskers, who had begun purring at the attention. The answer is in your question, Counselor. You're trying to understand chaos using logical frameworks. That's like trying to measure water with a ruler. He activated a holographic display showing their recent battles. The swarm's advantage has always been their ability to analyze and counter logical tactical patterns. Every species they've encountered fights according to established military doctrine. Predictable, counterable. The display showed the battle at Kepler 7 with shuttle movements that defied traditional formation flying. We didn't fight according to doctrine. We fought according to instinct. We abandoned structure in favor of adaptation. Delegate Korth of the Vegan Empire leaned forward. But how do you train instinct? How do you replicate beneficial randomness? You don't, Dr. Bell interjected from her position at the science station. That's the point. The moment you systematize chaos, it stops being chaos. She gestured to Whiskers, who was now investigating the interesting smells coming from the atmospheric recycling vents. This cat doesn't follow protocols. She responds to immediate stimuli with perfect confidence. Her actions create ripple effects that cascade into larger consequences. The Zenthari delegation leader, Nex, stood to address the chamber. The Zenthari Confederation has attempted to replicate these feline tactical protocols in our fleet exercises. Results have been suboptimal. Reed suppressed a smile. He had heard about the Zenthari experiments through diplomatic channels. They had acquired several Earth cats and attempted to create systematic chaos by following feline behavioral patterns. The results had been disasters of coordination and logistics. With respect, Nex, you missed the fundamental principle. You can't manufacture authentic chaos. It has to emerge naturally from the interaction between different systems. Counselor. Prime Zenth consulted her datapad. Explain the human advantage. What allows your species to benefit from chaos while others cannot? Bell stepped forward. Evolutionary adaptation. Humans co-evolved with thousands of other Earth species for millions of years. We learned to read nonverbal communication, to adapt to unpredictable behaviors, to find patterns in apparent randomness. We're chaos compatible. The chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed this concept. Species that had evolved in isolation or achieved dominance through logical superiority found themselves contemplating a completely alien approach to existence. You're saying chaos is a survival trait? Asked Delegate Voren of the Thermal Courts. I'm saying flexibility is a survival trait, Bell replied. The ability to abandon failed strategies and improvise new ones. The willingness to trust intuition when logic fails. These are advantages that can't be programmed or taught through traditional methods. Reed activated another display showing current galactic maps. The swarm has withdrawn from Federation space. Our intelligence reports indicate they're retreating to the galactic edge, marking human-occupied systems as logic-incompatible zones. The implications sent a wave of excitement through the chamber. The Devourer swarm had been the Federation's greatest existential threat for millennia. Their withdrawal represented a fundamental shift in galactic balance. However, Reed continued, this victory comes with responsibilities. Humanity requests permission to establish a new military doctrine within Federation forces. We call it the Chaos Protocol. Commander Voss of the Corvin delegation stood abruptly. Impossible. Military effectiveness requires discipline, training, standardized responses. Chaos is the enemy of order. Is it? Reed asked. Or is rigid order the enemy of adaptation? The debate that followed would rage for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. 3 successful engagements against the swarm had proven the effectiveness of human tactical innovations. The Federation needed this capability, even if they didn't fully understand it. When the formal vote was called, the Chaos Protocol was approved by a margin of 67%. Humanity would be authorized to train selected Federation forces in adaptive tactics with the understanding that results could not be guaranteed or replicated consistently. The ceremony concluded with Whiskers receiving the Federation's highest honor for non-sentient beings, the Crystal Star of Galactic Service. She accepted the award by promptly knocking it off the podium and chasing it across the chamber floor, to the delight of delegates who had never seen such undignified behavior in their formal proceedings. 6 months later, Dr. Bell published her landmark paper, Symbiotic Chaos Theory: How Human-Animal Bonds Create Adaptive Advantages in Complex Systems. The document became required reading at every military academy in Federation space, though few species successfully implemented its principles. The paper's most quoted passage read, "Humanity's greatest strategic asset is not our technology or our intelligence, but our willingness to embrace uncertainty. We do not fear chaos. We dance with it. We do not control randomness. We surf its waves. This partnership with the unpredictable makes us uniquely suited to face threats that defeat purely logical responses." Back aboard the Harmony, now designated as humanity's flagship for chaos warfare research, Whiskers had settled into her new role as Chief Morale Officer, with typical feline indifference to titles and responsibilities. Her quarters had been officially expanded to include a custom observation deck with multiple sunny spots for napping. She spent her days doing exactly what she had always done: exploring, playing, hunting maintenance drones, and providing comfort to stressed humans. The fact that these activities now constituted formal military doctrine amused Dr. Bell, but seemed to matter very little to Whiskers herself. Reed found her one evening in the observation lounge, watching stars drift past through the large viewport. He sat down beside her, scratching behind her ears while reviewing the day's reports. "You know what you've done, don't you?" he asked quietly. "You've changed the way an entire galaxy thinks about warfare." Whiskers purred and rubbed against. His hand then returned her attention to the stars. If she understood the significance of her actions, she gave no sign. To her, she had simply been living according to her nature, curious, adaptive, and completely confident in her right to exist wherever she chose. The reports on Reed's datapad told a different story. Across human space, every diplomatic vessel and military ship now carried at least one cat. The Feline Auxiliary Program had become the most popular assignment in the fleet. Crew efficiency had increased across all measures, while tactical unpredictability had become humanity's signature advantage. Other species continued to struggle with implementing chaos-based tactics. The Zenthari had given up entirely after an incident involving 17 cats, a research station, and what their reports described as total logical cascade failure. The Corvan military had achieved limited success by incorporating controlled randomness into their training, but they still preferred traditional formations for actual combat. Only humans seemed capable of true chaos symbiosis, and military theorists debated whether this was due to evolutionary factors, cultural conditioning, or simple species-specific madness. Reed preferred Dr. Bell's explanation. Humans had learned to find order within chaos rather than imposing order upon it. They could navigate uncertainty because they had practiced doing so for millions of years alongside creatures whose motivations they couldn't fully understand or predict. "The galaxy is safer because of you," Reed told Whiskers. "The swarm has retreated, the Federation is stronger, and humans have found their place among the stars." Whiskers responded by climbing into his lap and settling down for a nap. Her purring filled the quiet observation lounge with a sound that had comforted humans since the dawn of civilization. She was exactly where she belonged, at the center of a warm, safe space, surrounded by creatures who appreciated her for what she was, rather than what she could be trained to become. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their ancient dance, across the cosmos. Somewhere among them, the devourer swarm nursed their wounds and tried to calculate the probability of encountering more chaos-compatible species. Their mathematical models remained frustratingly incomplete, producing error messages whenever they attempted to factor in variables like friendship, loyalty, and the simple pleasure of a cat's purr. The machines had learned something they never expected. The universe was far stranger and more wonderful than their logical frameworks could accommodate. And at the heart of that strangeness sat a small orange cat who had saved the galaxy by being exactly what she had always been. Perfectly, chaotically, magnificently herself.